There is something no one tells you about power. It is not found in the loudest voice in the room. It is not found in the sharpest argument or the most devastating comeback. Real power, the kind that reshapes rooms and rearranges hierarchies, is found in the precise, deliberate act of withholding your attention. Most people have been trained from the moment they could speak to respond, to defend, to explain, to engage. You were taught that silence is weakness, that ignoring someone is rude, that the right answer to every provocation is a reaction. That conditioning was not an accident. It was designed to keep you predictable, and a predictable person is a controllable person. Niccolo Machiavelli, writing in the courts of Renaissance Italy, surrounded by conspirators, flatterers, and men who would smile at your face while sharpening a blade behind your back, understood something that most people in the modern world have completely forgotten. Attention is the currency of power, and the man who controls where his attention flows controls the social game entirely. This is not a video about being cold. It is not about becoming emotionally unavailable or teaching yourself to feel nothing. This is about something far more precise and far more dangerous. This is about learning the strategic art of withdrawal, knowing when to look away, when to remain silent, and why that silence can destroy an opponent more thoroughly than any argument ever could. Ask yourself honestly, how many times this week did you react when you should have been still? How many times did you explain yourself to someone who had already decided not to understand you? How many times did you hand over the keys to your peace because someone provoked you into a response? If you are still here, it is because you already feel, somewhere in the architecture of your instincts, that something is wrong, that you are losing energy in battles you were never supposed to fight. Good. That feeling is the beginning of clarity. Machiavelli observed the courts of powerful men and noticed a pattern that most courtiers never saw because they were too busy performing within it. The prince did not chase. The prince did not argue. The prince did not scramble for the last word. And when a courtier, a rival, or an enemy tried to provoke him, the most devastating weapon available was not a countermove. It was the withdrawal of his gaze. To be ignored by the powerful is to be erased, and to be erased is the deepest social terror a human being can experience. You have been living in a culture that has inverted this completely. Social media has turned reaction into a performance art. Every platform rewards the fastest response, the most emotional engagement, the hottest take. You are not being invited to think. You are being conditioned to react. And every time you react, every time you rush to defend yourself, explain yourself, or engage with someone who does not deserve your mental energy, you are handing over something that cannot be bought back. Your attention is your most finite and most valuable resource, and most people are hemorrhaging it daily without even noticing. Machiavelli wrote in The Prince that a ruler must know how to use both the lion and the fox. The lion frightens wolves, the fox recognizes traps. But there is a third mode, one Machiavelli understood implicitly through every page he wrote, the mode of stillness, the predator that does not move, the silence before the verdict, not the fox running, not the lion roaring, but the eagle that has already seen everything from above and simply does not descend. Think about the people in your life who have the most psychological weight, not the loudest ones, not the most aggressive. Think about the ones who seem unreachable, the ones who do not scramble when challenged, the ones whose approval feels difficult to access, not because they are cruel, but because their attention does not distribute freely. There is something in you, in all of us, that instinctively reads selective attention as high value. We are wired at a biological level to pursue what withdraws. Machiavelli did not need neuroscience to understand this. He had something better. He had observation. The court was his laboratory. Every day he watched men compete for the prince's gaze, restructure their identities around the prince's preferences, orbit around a man who remained still while the world moved around him. And he understood that the source of that gravitational pull was not charisma, it was not intelligence, it was the economy of engagement. When you respond to everyone, your attention means nothing. When you respond selectively, your attention becomes a prize, and people will do extraordinary things to win a prize. This is where modern life has made you vulnerable in ways that your ancestors never were. You carry a device in your pocket that demands immediate response to everything. Someone tags you, respond. Someone challenges you online, respond. Someone ignores your message, analyze, obsess, reread. The machinery of the attention economy has been specifically engineered to exploit the deepest social anxieties in the human psyche: the fear of being left out, the fear of being misunderstood, the fear of being dismissed. And every time you react from that fear, you confirm its power over you. Machiavelli would look at this and see not a cultural problem, but a strategic opportunity. Because while the masses are training themselves to be maximally reactive, the person who learns to be selectively still gains an asymmetric advantage. In a world of noise, silence becomes a weapon. In a world of compulsive engagement, withdrawal becomes power. Now stop and ask yourself this: who in your life triggers your most compulsive reactions? Who makes you feel the urgent need to explain yourself, defend yourself, prove yourself? Write that name somewhere in the architecture of your mind, because what you are about to understand will change how you relate to that person and to every person like them, permanently. There is a mechanism at work in social dynamics that most people never consciously examine. Machiavelli called flatterers one of the greatest dangers a prince could face, not because flattery is pleasant, but because it signals something more insidious. A flatterer needs your response. A flatterer is emotionally dependent on your engagement. And when you begin to look at the people who provoke you, who need to argue with you, who require your reaction to feel significant, you will start to see them not as threats, but as something far less frightening. You will see them as people who need you more than you need them. This is the psychological architecture of the provocateur, the person who starts arguments, who sends the message designed to unsettle you, who makes the cutting remark in public. They are not operating from a position of strength, they're operating from a position of hunger. They need to know that they have affected you. Your reaction is their food, your distress is their oxygen. And the moment you understand this, truly understand it, not just intellectually but viscerally, ignoring them stops being an act of restraint and starts being an act of dominance. Schopenhauer, who shared Machiavelli's unflinching view of human nature, argued that most human conflict is not driven by reason, but by the will, the blind, relentless drive to assert the self, to dominate the environment, to prove existence through impact. When someone needs to provoke you, they are trying to prove their impact on your world. They are asking, and the only language their ego speaks, "Do I matter to you?" And when you refuse to answer, when you look through them as though the question was never asked, you do not just deny them the answer, you deny them the existence of the question. That is not unkindness, that is power in its most refined form. But here is where most people get this wrong. They understand intellectually that they should not react. They tell themselves to stay calm. They white-knuckle their way through the provocation, suppressing the response while still internally engaged, still thinking about it, still rehearsing the comeback, still processing the wound. That is not strategic ignorance, that is suppressed reaction, and suppressed reaction still leaks. People can feel it. They see the tension in your jaw, the too careful stillness, the deliberate blankness. True strategic ignorance is different. It requires a fundamental internal shift, not just a behavioral one. Machiavelli's prince did not pretend not to care about the courtier's insult. He genuinely had his attention elsewhere, on the campaign, on the alliance, on the architecture of the state. His indifference was not performed, it was structural. His vision was large enough that the small provocations of small men did not register as significant stimuli. And this is the deeper teaching. Strategic ignorance is not about suppressing your reaction to the unimportant. It is about genuinely expanding your field of concern until the unimportant becomes truly small. This is why the most powerful people you will ever encounter seem to operate at a different frequency. They are not pretending to be unbothered. They are genuinely occupied with something larger, with something that commands more of their attention than any petty provocation ever could. Their indifference is not a mask, it is a consequence of their vision. When you have built something real, when you are in pursuit of something that demands everything you have, the person trying to destabilize you with a comment or a silence or a slight becomes what they actually are, a distraction you cannot afford. Now share your thoughts. In what area of your life have you been spending the most energy reacting? Where has your attention been leaking into conflicts and conversations that have cost you more than they were ever worth? The answer to that question is the map of where your power is currently being held captive. Machiavelli wrote that a prince must avoid being hated, but need not worry about being loved. This is counterintuitive in a world that teaches you to optimize for likability. But consider what Machiavelli was actually saying beneath the surface of that advice. He was saying that the pursuit of love, the compulsive need to be understood, accepted, validated, creates a vulnerability that enemies and rivals will exploit without mercy. It is not love that protects you, it is the absence of the need for it. The person who does not need your approval cannot be threatened by its withdrawal. The person who does not need to be understood cannot be silenced by your misunderstanding. The person who does not need to win the argument cannot be goaded into fighting one. This is not coldness, this is self-sovereignty, and it is exactly the quality that Machiavelli identified in the most enduring leaders he studied. Men who had learned to treat their own inner state as a fortress that external events could not breach. You have been told your whole life that needing connection is human, that vulnerability is strength, that you should let people in, and there is truth in that, deep truth. But there is a distinction that almost no one makes clearly enough. Choosing vulnerability with people who have earned access to your inner world is a form of strength. Being emotionally permeable to everyone, allowing every slight, every silence, every withheld text message to penetrate your sense of self is not vulnerability, it is porosity, and porous people are controlled by weather. Think about the moments in your life when you had the least power. Not when you had the least money or the least status, but when you felt most psychologically small. Trace it back. In almost every case, you will find the same root. You needed something from someone who was not giving it. You needed the explanation. You needed the apology. You needed them to see what they had done, to acknowledge it, to respond, and they did not. And that need, not the original slight, but the need, is what held you captive. Machiavelli understood this dynamic with brutal precision. He observed that a prince who requires his subjects' love has given them a weapon, the power to withhold it. A prince who requires only their compliance has given them nothing to threaten. Now translate this from politics to your personal life. Every person whose approval you need holds leverage over you, and leverage, once understood by the other side, will eventually be used. This is not cynicism, this is strategic realism. And strategic realism, applied with precision, does not produce a cold and isolated life. It produces a selective and sovereign one. The Stoics understood this long before Machiavelli formalized it into political philosophy. Marcus Aurelius wrote that you have power over your mind, not outside events, and that realizing this is the beginning of strength. Epictetus, who began his life as a literal slave, taught that the only thing no master could ever take from him was the choice of how to respond to what happened to him. These men did not advocate for disconnection from the world. They advocated for a specific and radical form of freedom, the freedom that comes from genuinely not requiring the world to behave in any particular way for your inner state to remain intact. When you stop needing someone's reaction, their behavior stops having authority over your peace. When their silence no longer triggers your anxiety, their silence loses its power to control you. This is not achieved through suppression. It is achieved through the slow, difficult work of building an inner world so rich, so self-sustaining, so genuinely compelling, that the outer world's fluctuations stop feeling like emergencies. This is the deeper practice behind the art of ignoring. It is not a social trick, it is an inner architecture, and building it changes everything about how you move through rooms, through relationships, through the constant low-grade warfare of everyday social life. Now we arrive at the mechanics, the specific, applicable intelligence that separates those who understand it theoretically from those who live it. Machiavelli was not a philosopher in the abstract sense. He was a practitioner. He wrote The Prince not as a meditation, but as a manual. And the manual gives us 3 distinct categories of people and 3 correspondingly distinct approaches to the art of strategic ignorance. The first category is the provocateur, the person who needs your reaction to maintain their sense of significance. They prod, they poke, they make comments designed to draw you out. With the provocateur, strategic ignorance is complete and total. You do not respond to the bait, not once, not with a sigh, not with a look, not with the too deliberate absence of response that still signals you noticed. You are simply and genuinely elsewhere. You are occupied. The provocateur's greatest fear is irrelevance, and irrelevance is exactly what you give them, not as punishment, but as an accurate reflection of their actual status in your life. The second category is the manipulator, the person who uses emotional temperature to control outcomes. They escalate, they dramatize, they manufacture urgency. They want you reactive because a reactive person is a predictable person, and a predictable person can be led. With the manipulator, strategic ignorance is calibrated. You do not match their emotional temperature. You respond, when necessary, from a significantly lower register, calm where they are frantic, brief where they are elaborate, interested in facts where they are invested in feelings. Your very steadiness destabilizes their game because their game requires your participation at their level of heat. The third category is the person who underestimates you, who has written a small story about who you are and refuses to revise it. This is perhaps the most psychologically interesting category because the temptation here is to correct the record, to prove them wrong, to demonstrate your actual capacity. Machiavelli would say, resist that temptation entirely. The prince does not explain himself to those who have already decided. He simply acts, and then he lets the results do the correcting, without the indignity of having argued for them in advance. Your competence is not a case you make, it is a reality you build, and the right response to someone who has underestimated you is not a rebuttal, it is a silence, followed eventually by evidence. These 3 approaches share a common structure. They all require you to know with absolute clarity what actually deserves your attention and what does not. This is not always easy. There will be moments when the provocation is sharp enough to cut through your defenses, when the manipulation is sophisticated enough to hook your genuine emotions, when the underestimation is public enough to trigger the part of you that still needs to be seen clearly. And in those moments, the discipline required is not the suppression of your response, it is the redirection of your energy away from the conflict and back toward what actually matters. Machiavelli wrote that men are so simple and so subject to present necessities that the deceiver will never lack victims for his deceptions. He was not writing with contempt, he was writing with precision. Most people are so governed by their immediate emotional state, so captured by the present provocation, that they cannot see the longer game being played around them. The person who can see the longer game, who can let the small battle go in service of the larger war, is not operating at the same level as everyone else. They are playing a different game entirely. This is why the art of ignoring is not a technique for winning arguments. It is a strategy for winning lives. It is the recognition that every exchange you enter, every conflict you engage with, every provocateur you respond to is costing you something that cannot be reclaimed. The hours and the attention and the psychic energy that could have been directed toward the building of something real, and the accumulation of those unclaimed hours is the difference between the life you are living and the life you are capable of living. Take stock right now. Think about where your attention has been distributed in the last month. How much of it went toward things you actually chose, toward building, creating, learning, connecting with people who genuinely matter to you, and how much of it was extracted from you, pulled into arguments you did not start, anxieties you did not author, reactions you could not help. The gap between those two numbers is the gap between your current life and the life that becomes available to you on the other side of this practice. The final and most important truth about the art of ignoring is a paradox so clean that most people resist it the first time they encounter it. The moment you genuinely stop needing people to notice you is the moment you become impossible to ignore. This is not magic, this is mechanics. When you withdraw your emotional dependency from the social game, you stop chasing, and what stops chasing becomes worth pursuing. When you stop performing for the crowd, you start becoming interesting to people who are actually worth impressing. When you stop reacting to every provocation, you stop being predictable. And unpredictability in a world of compulsive reactions is magnetic. Machiavelli's prince was not loved by the courtiers, he was studied by them. They could not read him because he did not perform for them. He was not trying to be understood, he was trying to be effective, and his effectiveness, his willingness to be misread, his willingness to allow the wrong interpretation to stand, if the right response was silence, is precisely what made him unreachable. The person you cannot read, you cannot control. The person who does not need your approval cannot be threatened. The person whose attention is genuinely rare becomes genuinely valuable. This is not about becoming someone who does not care. It is about becoming someone who cares very specifically about the work, about the few people who have earned genuine access, about the vision that is actually worth the expenditure of your finite and irreplaceable time. Everyone else receives the polished surface, courteous, professional, appropriate. They do not receive the inner world, not because the inner world is being protected out of fear, but because it is too valuable to distribute freely. Carl Jung wrote that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. What he meant beneath the surface of that statement is that most people use other people's reactions as the primary source of data about who they are. When the reactions are good, they feel real. When the reactions are withdrawn, they feel threatened. The practice of strategic ignorance requires something more difficult than a behavioral adjustment. It requires the slow construction of an inner sense of self that does not derive its solidity from external confirmation. It requires you to become, as Marcus Aurelius practiced, someone whose foundation is internal, whose center does not move when the weather changes. Here is the question you must take with you, not as a rhetorical device, not as a closing flourish, as a genuine and urgent investigation into the architecture of your own life. Where are you currently performing for an audience that does not serve your growth? Where is your attention being held hostage by someone whose opinion of you has no bearing on the person you are actually capable of becoming? And what would become possible? What would open up in your life, in your work, in the deep quality of your days, if you simply looked away? Most people who hear this will nod. They will feel the resonance of it in their bones, and then they will go back to their phones and their arguments and their compulsive need to be seen and understood and validated by people who have proven repeatedly that they cannot see them clearly. That is the tragic arithmetic of the ordinary life. You can choose differently. You can choose the longer game. You can choose the economy of selective attention, not because it makes you hard, but because it makes you free. And freedom, real structural interior freedom, is the only form of power that cannot be taken from you. Machiavelli spent his life studying men who built empires and men who lost them, and in the end, the distinction was always the same. The ones who lasted longest were not the most aggressive, they were the most still. The ones who endured were the ones who understood that the deepest strategic advantage available to any human being is this: to need very little, to decide very deliberately, and to let the world wonder what is happening behind those eyes. The art of ignoring is the art of sovereignty. Build it, protect it, let it make you impossible to hold.